Teresa Tippis. Hi, everyone. My name is Mustafa Enver, and I am the paralegal here in the Reentry Department at Legal Aid Society. And today we're just doing an overview of the services that our department offers, and we have our wonderful attorney and now program director, Savannah Quintero, leading the presentation.
Thanks, Mustafa. So like Mustafa said, we'll give an overview of kind of some of the services that our program offers. We call ourselves the reentry department. So a lot of our services, what we mean by that is we're aimed at serving people that face legal barriers when reentering society after incarceration. So that's kind of an overview of what we'll be going over today. But without further ado, Legal Aid Society is a nonprofit law firm. Our mission is to advance, defend, and enforce the legal rights of low-income and vulnerable people in order to secure them the basic necessities of life. These are our areas of practice. They're pretty broad, and we cover 48 counties, and we stretch across a pretty good part of the state. There's a big legal need in Tennessee, about 8,000 citizens that might need our services. There's about one attorney for all of those folks. We have 43 attorneys in 8 offices, but as you can kind of maybe get the feel from some of these numbers, there's a pretty big need for civil legal services for people who can't afford an attorney. And we're some of the folks out there doing the work to help folks that need an attorney but might not be able to afford one. Something I'd like to add at this point is that currently our unit is closed for intake. However, we're going to put some resources in the chat for you. In the coming weeks, we'll reopen, and please give us a call when we do. However, in the meantime, you might want to rely on a few resources. The Tennessee Alliance for Legal Services has a wonderful hotline where you can get free advice from an attorney. And there's a few other beautiful, wonderful resources that you can rely on in the meantime. That'll be in the chat. We'll give an overview of a lot of the legal services and legal processes that impact folks that are reentering. We're not giving legal advice today, though. We'll just give legal information. If we get questions, if you have questions about your specific situation, I think that's when you might want to reach out to some of the resources we put in the chat, or maybe give us a call when our intake reopens. But for now, if you have a question that's specific to your situation, we'll wait to talk about your situation when we can talk one-on-one. So this is an overview of kind of some of the services that we offer. I think that our aim is to address any of the legal barriers that might impact someone who is reentering. So this is maybe an abbreviated list. If you have a legal issue that is a result of your involvement with the criminal justice system, I'd like to talk to you when our intake reopens. So just because you don't see your legal issue on this list doesn't mean that we don't want to talk to you. But these are some of the big issues that we deal with. Expungement is a really big one. We'll talk a lot about that today. Court costs. We love restoring rights if you've lost your rights as a result of a conviction. We'd love to restore them for you. A lot of folks have driver's license issues when they're returning. If you have been put on a registry because of your conviction, we'd like to look at that, as well as certificates of employability. Am I missing anything, Mustafa? Cool. We'll keep rolling. Okay, so let's start out with kind of defining broadly what expungement is. There's two big things I think it's important to keep in mind that expungement can do for you. It's number one, public facing records, and number two, government records. Those kinds of records, when those two things come together, those records are destroyed during the expungement process. So I think an important thing to think about when thinking about expungement, if it's not a government record, so if it's, for example, a private background checking site or something like that that has records of your involvement with the criminal justice system, that won't be destroyed in the process. And also if it's not public, it won't be destroyed in the process. So law enforcement keeps some records internally. Those records are not made available to the public, but all public facing government records are destroyed or made no longer available for public inspection. Clear as mud? We feel good? Good. All right. So I think when we're talking about expungement, it's important to think about, to separate types of ways that your case ended, and then think about how those cases need to be dealt with in terms of expungement. So there's a couple different buckets I like to talk about when I'm talking about expungement. The first bucket we'll talk about are non-convictions. So if you went to court, if you were charged with a criminal offense, and you were found not guilty, maybe the case was dismissed, maybe the case was presented to a grand jury and the grand jury returned a no true bill. Essentially anything that didn't end with you either going on a diversion program or being convicted, it's probably going to be a non-conviction case. So those cases are pretty simple to deal with, but you have to deal with them. These cases do not automatically come off of your record. A lot of folks think, they dismissed that case. It went away. It went away. It didn't go away unless you made it go away through the expungement process, and it is still on your record. And those are things that can kind of clog your record and make your record longer than it needs to be. So I think it's important to actually, take those steps to go through the expungement process and make sure cases that you weren't convicted on are expunged. So we'll talk a little bit about that process. So it's a free process. You should not be charged a fee to expunge a non-conviction case. You may have to pay court costs. So sometimes they'll dismiss a case on costs, and you may be asked to pay those costs even though the case was dismissed. You won't be able to expunge a non-conviction until you deal with those costs. But the fee to actually expunge it is non-existent. If you're asked to pay a fee to expunge a non-conviction, maybe stop and say, hey, wait a second, is this court costs or is this a fee to expunge? Because you're not supposed to be charged a fee for this. How do you feel about that, Mustafa?
I was just wondering, how do I approach a non-conviction expungement based on the county I live in?
That's a really good question. I think I would start with your clerk's office. And I think that's a good step to begin with when you're thinking about expungement in general. I would go to my county clerk's office. I think it's important to remember too, there might be multiple county clerk's offices that you need to go to. So there might be a clerk's office for criminal courts. There might be one for the general sessions courts. So just make sure you're thorough in your visits to clerk's offices in your county. But clerk's offices can provide you with information about what's on your record. So that's where I would start. I would go and I would pull my criminal history from the counties that I know I have criminal cases in, just to get more information about what's on my record. Because I mentioned with non-convictions, a lot of people are surprised that these non-convictions are on their record, and there might be some stuff on there that you're surprised about. The TBI keeps a form on the website. Lots of clerk's offices will help you and provide you with the form, but it's just a form that you're going to fill out, put information about your case on it, information about you on it, and then you will file that with the clerk's office. Again, there's no fee to file that form. And then that form will be off on about a 90-day process that will clear that case from public-facing government records. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Okay. Anything else you think we need to talk about on non-convictions?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. Convictions are a little bit more complicated. And I want to pause just for a moment to note that diversions fall somewhere in the middle here. If you successfully complete your diversion program, that case should be dismissed. Awesome. When that case is dismissed, it's handled just like a dismissal, like we just talked about, except for there is a $100 fee to expunge a dismissed diversion case. So watch out for that. With conviction expungements, just a little bit more complicated, but I want to leave you with some simple rules that will help you maybe think about whether or not you're eligible. This is not an exhaustive list, and I would not rely on just these hard and fast rules to determine whether or not you're eligible. So I think that, like, if you have a conviction that you want expunged, I would 100% talk to an attorney about it because it is a little complicated. But I think something that will help you kind of understand the landscape, just a few rules that we have here. There are waiting periods for conviction expungements. 10 years for C&D felonies, E-felonies and misdemeanors are 5 years. That clock starts running on those wait periods when you finish your sentence. So if you're on probation for the conviction that you would like to expunge, your clock has not started yet because you've not completed your sentence. Once you finish probation, if you flatten your sentence, anything like that, once your sentence is completely over and done, that clock starts running. And depending on the conviction, it'll be either a 5 or 10-year wait period. Right now, you cannot expunge an A or B felony. And there are lists that we have in the law that tells us what kinds of CDE felonies or misdemeanors that we can expunge. So we've got ineligible misdemeanors. If you bring me your case and it's a misdemeanor, I will go and look at the misdemeanor list. I don't want to find your misdemeanor on that list because if I do, it's not eligible for expungement. If you bring me a felony conviction and I look at those felony lists, I do want to find your felony on those lists because that means it is eligible for expungement. It's just a little confusing, but we do have some lists that very specifically lay out what's expungible and what's not. I get the question a lot, well, is X or Y expungible? For example, I've got a theft case. Is that expungible? What I'll probably tell you is I don't know. I need to check the list. And that's because these lists are kind of seemingly a little bit random. I always check my lists to see whether or not my case is or is not on the list where I want to see it. The only really hard and fast rules we have is if it's a DUI, it's not expungible, or if it's a domestic violence case, it's not expungible. And those are really the only hard and fast rules that I have to give you. I wish I had better hard and fast rules to give you, but I just don't. So that's kind of an overview. We've got a little bit more coming, but Mustafa, do you have questions about this? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one question that comes to mind for me is like, why should I pursue a conviction expungement? And is there a cost if I do?
Oh, that's really, yep, that's right. So I'll answer the question on costs first. There's a $100 fee to file a conviction expungement. I think that the question you ask about whether or not, why would I expunge a conviction? I think that it can help with kind of a broad range of issues that are kind of very important and central to any person's life. So your ability to find housing, A lot of times criminal background checks are a part of whether or not you can rent your house or a part of the rental process. So it may help you to find housing if you can clear some stuff off your record. And that goes for non-convictions as well. When you pull that criminal history, they see all of it. So I think that expunging non-convictions and convictions is, super important part of maybe finding housing. Employment is another big thing. A lot of times our convictions can prevent us from getting, certain kinds of licensure that we need to work, or maybe, when you do the criminal background checking process for a job that you applied for that you really want and are qualified for, maybe a criminal conviction stands in the way of you be able to get that job. Those are just two, I think, big things that'll kind of linger and maybe hold you back. And I think conviction is an important part of maybe getting past those things.
Is there a limit of expungements I can get?
That is a really good question. We're going to move on to the next slide. So there is. I don't think that you can get more than probably 3 expungements for a lifetime right now. So there's a provision in the statute that'll allow for 2. There's a provision that'll allow for 1. And those are per lifetime. There are probably very few people that'll qualify for 2 expungements. I think the way the law changed last year, a lot of people will qualify for 1 expungement. And that 1 expungement, it's the timeline matters. And so that's part of why it's a little bit complicated. And I think you should really sit down with an attorney before you pay $100 to file a conviction expungement that maybe won't be granted because maybe the law is just a little complicated, and we got to look at that timeline. We got to think about our waiting periods. We got to think about just kind of a lot of different stuff that's going into the pot and when we're considering whether or not a conviction is eligible for expungement. So I think that if we're looking at a record with 6 convictions, all of those convictions will not be eligible for expungement. However, maybe 1 is, and I'd love to look at your record and sit down and talk about it. Anything else? Does that make sense?
I think I'm good.
All right. Thank you. Cool. Okay, so that's conviction expungement. The other thing we do a lot of is driver's licenses. I think that folks that are reentering, this is not something that's maybe a surprise, but a lot of times involvement with the criminal justice system can put some barriers in place with your driver's licenses. So these are just a few things that can hold up your driver's license. One of the biggest ones that we deal with is court costs. If it's certain kinds of offenses, if you owe court costs on them, so one thing I would really caution people is if you get a letter from the Department of Safety or from the clerk's office that says, hey, you owe court costs, pay these fees, or get on a payment plan, or we're revoking your license, listen to that letter and call and try and get on a payment plan, because that'll help keep your license from being revoked. Not everybody has that luxury, and I understand, but if you do get that letter, pay attention to it, because it could save you a little bit of heartache to go ahead and get on a payment plan. Certain convictions, like driving related convictions, if you've got a lot of driving convictions, or DUIs sometimes, and that'll hold you up. And the other thing is child support, and that's, again, if you get a letter from child support that says, hey, we're going to revoke your license if you don't get the child support, get current on arrears, or whatever it is, I would listen to that letter and make sure you get on a payment plan and stay current. I think a lot of people don't know why their license is revoked. I think that a lot of times maybe folks just, there could be a lot of things impacting the license is the other thing too, so it might just not be one thing. Go to this website we have on this slide, and I think it'll be provided as well in the chat. There, if you go to, there's a box that says reinstatement, and if you click on reinstatement requirements, it'll ask you for some personal information. Put in that information, and it'll auto-populate a letter that'll tell you exactly why your driver's license has been revoked. And from there, it's just kind of a checklist, just going through everything that you need to do to get your driver's license reinstated. So some people might want to consider a restricted license. For example, if court costs are going to be a problem, or if there's a hoop you need to jump through that you're not able to jump through, you may want to consider a restricted license. It'll help you get to work, help you get to religious services, lots of kind of necessary life tasks. And you can work on a payment plan, pay your court costs and stuff like that while you're driving with your restricted license. You can still get to work, so that may be something that folks want to consider. What am I missing, Mustafa?
Yeah, I mean, I see that this mentions like an SR22 insurance. If I see that on my reinstatement requirements, like what can I do to help that?
Yes. So I think the important thing to remember with the SR22 is that it's not something that you can provide to the Department of Safety. So everything else is going to be things that, when I finish paying my court costs, I'm going to go to the clerk's office and I'm going to ask them to submit proof or give me some sort of letter that I can give to the Department of Safety to show that I've paid my court costs. Or same with child support, or we're going to have those agencies communicate with the Department of Safety to tell them that I've checked off that box. With SR22, you're going to go and get insurance, and then you're going to have the insurance tell the Department of Safety that you have that insurance. It's a form and a process that you cannot complete, that you need your insurance company to complete for you. So if you see that on there, insurance companies know what that means. So I would call your auto insurance company and say, hey, I need some SR22 help, and they can help you with that. They know what that means.
If I have like a really large reinstatement fee for getting my license back, is there anything I can do to address that?
I don't know of any resources that are available to address that. Those are not costs that I think that the long and short answer is they just need to be paid. I think that that's something that maybe if you can't pay your reinstatement fees, maybe we talk about a restricted license or something like that. The Department of Safety can work on a payment plan with you sometimes. And so I would contact the Department of Safety about that. But that is something to be on the lookout for. So when you get your reinstatement letter, when you go to this website and you pull your reinstatement letter, and it has all these little boxes you need to check in order to get your license back, there'll be a paragraph at the end of that letter that'll tell you what your reinstatement fee is, and it'll be different for everyone. So if your mama has a different reinstatement fee than you do, or your sister or your brother, that's normal. That's very normal. It's very individualized what that reinstatement fee is going to be for you. So that does need to be paid in order to get your driver's license back, and I think that's something that folks want to plan for.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Sound good?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, cool. All right, restoration of civil rights. Okay, so this is like a big bucket of rights we're talking about here. There are kind of two processes that we'll talk about for restoring rights. One of them is going to be, we use a court process to kind of restore your big bundle of rights. And then there is a more administrative process for restoring just your voting rights that we'll talk about next. But first, we'll talk about this big kind of the process for, we'll talk about restoring your civil rights in general. So if you've been convicted of a felony, and this is so important, folks that are convicted of misdemeanors all the time say, like, what do I have to do to get my rights back? You don't. You haven't lost them. If you've only been convicted of misdemeanors, you have not lost your rights. You're good to go. Tune out of this conversation. If you've been convicted of a felony, you probably lost your citizenship rights. And that's a lot of things that people generally think about. Their voting rights, but it's other things too. You can't run for office. You can't be the executor for someone's will. You can't serve on a jury. There's lots of things like that that come with being a citizen in your community and a real like part of the fabric of your community that people maybe don't think about when they think about losing their civil rights. there's a court process that I would ask an attorney for help with, where you go to the court and you say, "Hey, court, I know I've been convicted of a felony, but hey, I've kind of turned my life around, and wouldn't it be nice to restore my civil rights?" Um, I would love to help with that process. Um, and we've got some questions coming in. Okay, I'm gonna check it out. I'm gonna deal with that, Mustafa, just in a minute. Does that sound okay? I'll come to
That
a
sounds
stopping
great.
point and we'll talk about it. But there's a court process that I'd like to help you with in order to kind of restore all those rights and just be real thorough about the process. So we'll move on to voting rights, unless I've missed anything. Is there
No,
something
I think you got
we need to
everything.
talk about if we missed? Okay, that's just real general. I just want, essentially with this, before I would encourage you to speak to an attorney to restore your before going to restore your civil rights. Know that your civil rights are not just your voting rights. There's a lot of other things, and know that if you've not been convicted of a felony, this doesn't apply to you. You've not lost your rights. So let's move on to your voting rights. So there's a separate kind of just administrative process that we should talk about with your voting rights. There's a form, and a lot of your clerk's offices will have this form for you. And it'll have a bunch of boxes for a bunch of different agencies to sign off and say you've done a bunch of different stuff and that you are now eligible to restore your right to vote. Those we talk about on the right, how can I get my rights back? So you don't owe child support. You don't owe court costs. You completed all the requirements of your sentence. The form that we have to kind of use this administrative process to restore your voting rights, we'll have agencies sign off that you've done these things. You cannot fill out this form. You need to go to your clerk's office. The clerk's office is where you have felony convictions, and you do need every single clerk's office where you have a felony conviction to sign off, saying that you have paid all your court costs. You'll then need, wherever you served your sentence for those felony convictions, you need the people supervising that sentence to sign off and say that you've completed all the requirements of your sentence. A lot of times for folks, that's probation and parole. And you just need to go to those folks and have them sign off and say that you're done. For child support, once that is filled out by those agencies, that can then go to the Secretary of State. At that point, I understand it's at that point that they do the checking to see if you owe any child support. If you're good to go on that, then you should get something back in the mail that says, "Hey, we're good to go. Go register to vote." And I think what I would leave you with here is you can't fill out this form, but you may have to do some legwork in getting the right signatures on this form. And again, those things are going to be court costs. Get clerks to sign off on court costs, and then get whoever supervised your sentence to sign off saying that you completed your sentence. And then know that it may not say it on the form, but like you will have to deal with any child support arrears that you owe. That will come up in the process. So make sure we're steady on that before you go through this process, because there is some danger and you have to start all over again if it's kicked back. So make sure you've got all these things squared away before you start, I think would be my advice. Again, this is only for felonies. There are some people that will not be able to restore their right to vote. Call an attorney to talk more about this. Either call us when we open back up or use one of the resources that's in the chat. From certain time periods, there are certain kinds of convictions that you won't be able to restore your right to vote. Generally, those are, fraudulently trying to vote or murder and rape are the big ones, that'll prevent you or kind of put up a barrier there. Although we do have this time period on the slide that you see where there aren't those barriers, and you're good to go. So, because there's specific rules based on when you were convicted, and those rules are kind of complicated, I would see an attorney if you've got one of the convictions we mentioned, or even just in general. I think I'd run this past an attorney before I started this process, because you'd hate to get through all this legwork and find out that you're not eligible. What am I missing, Mustafa?
Well, I mean, you've mentioned child support a couple times as something that can really hold me back. What can I do to address that? Is that something legal aid can help me with?
I would call your local child support agency. There's on the child support website, they've got contact information for all the local field offices, and I would call my local field office and say, explain the situation. Hey, I'm behind. Can I get on my payment plan? Or, hey, my income changed, and we need to adjust. I would also, this is another thing, I would maybe look to the clerk's office for the court that ordered the child support, or to the court that ordered the child support. A lot of times those places will have really good self-help forums that'll help you ask the court to change a child support order, or that will kind of help you set a payment plan or something like that. That's really dependent on what county you're in, though. So I would, it's always worth a call to check and make sure and see what happens, see what you can get. Anything else I'm missing? Cool. I'm going to look at this question we've got. If you think that that's the right time for that. So I think that, Ruth, your question is about adoption. I think I would give us a call and see. That may be something that we might be able to at least, give you some good information about who to turn to for that problem. I don't know off the top of my head, and I think we'd need to talk to you more and get a few more details about your case in order to know what we can do for you. But give us a call. And we'll look more at your case in depth, and we'll give you a better answer for whether or not we can help you with that. But thank you for your question. All right, I think the last thing we need to talk about, and I think that you may have noticed that there's a theme running throughout a lot of this stuff, which is court costs. Court costs will prevent you from doing a lot of things we talked about. Prevent you from restoring your right to vote, will prevent you from driving, will prevent you from expunging. In addition to all these things that we have on the screen, this may be something that, your wages are garnished. It may be something that causes you a lot of stress because you can't drive and get to work and pay your court costs. It's a big barrier. And if you're dealing with court costs that are holding you back, you're definitely not alone. There are lots of Tennesseans dealing with this problem. There's a few things that I think you might want to look at doing, and it might be a good idea to help you get an attorney to help you. Some folks will be able to go to court, tell the court about their financial situation, kind of how much they're making and how much is coming in and coming out every month, and hopefully show the court that I can't afford to pay these court costs. It's just not something that's in the cards for me. Sometimes a court will waive some of those court costs. I think it's absolutely worth a try. And the other thing is that I think that sometimes there's a way to get what you need, even if the court won't waive the court costs. A lot of times the court will order a payment plan, maybe make the burden a little lighter. But again, we talked about the restricted driver's licenses. If court costs are holding up your driver's licenses, maybe think about a restricted license. But this is a pretty big barrier, and I think that this is something that I would talk to an attorney about if this is something that's holding you up on any of these things. What are you thinking, Mustafa?
I mean, is
Is
there any
something
way to have them waived if they're just like so much? And like, what kind of cost can I have waived?
sure. I would ask the court about waiving all the costs. You just never know what a court might or might not be willing to waive. There are lots and lots of judges all over the state, and no two are alike, and they may have different. No two cases are alike either. So I think that going to a court, laying out your case, showing what's coming in, coming out, and maybe reasons that your financial situation isn't going to change. I think might help convince a court to waive these costs. So I think it's worth a shot. Or it might be worth talking to an attorney about finding some sort of way to get what you need in spite of court costs.
Where would I start to like get something waived?
So I think you're going to want to when we talked about stuff that's going in and going out, you're going to want to file what's called an affidavit of indigency with the court. And that's where you're going to swear to the court that what you're saying is true. And you're going to provide the court all of that financial information in writing. It's a lot of information. A lot of courts and court clerks will be able to provide you with the form that you need, this affidavit of indigency form, in order to move forward. Some courts may require some kind of motion to go with that affidavit. So this motion just asks the court to do what you want it to do, and the affidavit of indigency is just your proof or your evidence that is trying to convince the court to do what you want it to do. So I would start with my clerk and just ask about the process and just say, hey, I've got these court costs. I don't think I'm ever going to be able to afford to pay them. How do I get in front of a judge to ask the court to waive these costs? The other thing is that court clerks are going to be helpful in setting up a payment plan if that's something that's realistic for you. So that's something that I would ask about as well.
Is there a minimum or a maximum I should expect if I end up on a payment plan?
So the law says that it should be realistic. We don't want to set you up to fail. So it should be based realistically on your ability to pay. If you're not, there's not a lot of wiggle room in your budget, we shouldn't set you $1,000 a month to pay for a payment plan. It's got to be something that you can realistically stick through. And I would make sure that it's something you can realistically stick to. We just don't want to set you up for failure. So I would push for a payment plan that really fit with something that's realistic for me to pay every month. Clear as mud.
Clear as mud.
Beautiful. All right. Well, that's it, y'all. And this is just a super broad overview of kind of the services that we offer. There's a lot more detail that I think we would go over if y'all are dealing with any of these issues, and we go over that together. So
I think there's one service we forgot to mention, and I think it's one of the best ones we do, and it's our expungement clinics. Could you tell me more about them, and then do you have any coming up?
You're right. So we do have 2 expungement clinics coming up. Unfortunately, registration is closed for our Robertson County Expungement Clinic. That is coming up at the end of the month, but we do have an expungement clinic coming up in Williamson County. Got a lot of wonderful partners for that clinic. Judge Binkley has agreed graciously to be there. The public defenders and the DAs are going to be there. And the Urban League has done a lot of work in making this happen. So I think that's going to be a really wonderful event. We're linking to registration for that clinic. Something that I think is important to note is that we're only going to be able to help folks with cases that came out of Williamson County, or the Davidson County clerk is going to be there as well. So we're going to get some help with Davidson County cases as well for that clinic. But in general, I would register for that clinic if you have criminal cases in Williamson County. this is going to be kind of a full service clinic. We're going to be able to expunge non-convictions. We're also going to look and analyze folks' records for potential conviction expungements. And we do have, because we'll have some judges on site, we have the ability to present your case like we described earlier, if you may qualify for a fee waiver to help us expunge. So I think it's going to be a pretty thorough clinic, and I'm really excited about it. So if you have cases, criminal cases in Williamson County, and you would like for them to be expunged, I would use that JOT form link to register, and we will get rolling with that process for you.
Yeah.
What else did I miss, Mustafa? I know I
I
missed
think that's
something.
everything. I mean, if anyone has any questions, this would be a great time to ask them. I think we're at a pretty stopping point for us.
Awesome. Okay. All right. We don't have any questions?
I don't think so.
And that's okay. All right, y'all. Well, as questions roll in, we'll respond to them. But for now, I think that's it. Y'all look to those resources that are in the chat for help. We'll be back to taking cases here pretty soon. And we like to talk to you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for hanging out.
Well, thank you so much, Savannah. We definitely appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Appreciate you. Thanks, Mustafa.
Anytime.
We'll see ya.